You know, this is what every single last king needs to understand. Currently, as you can clearly see, I'm in my car, 2017 Kia Sportage, in the parking lot, and it is getting dark outside, but I gotta make this video. I gotta spit. I gotta spit some more. I gotta spit some more verses, you feel me? Preach the gospel, But anyway, as most of us know, next week it begins, peak FOT season. Peak FOT season, and it's coming at us hard. 100-degree weather is really coming at us hard. It's about to hit us hard. I pray for any guy, including myself, that is in a relationship right now, because of course, our relationships will be tested. You feel me? It will be tested, but love only knows itself through its struggle. But anyway, as most of us know in Gen Z, I'm Gen Z myself and even other generations, but most of us know that the streets are on a generational run. The streets are currently winning. The streets are just taking bodies, destroying niggas, you feel me? And leaving them for dead. And girls too. The streets are on a generational run. I asked ChatGPT and it said Gen Z relationships only have a 10 to 15% chance of survival. They're, surviving long term. You feel me? Talking stages, situationships, casual flings, casual hookups, those dominate. You feel me? Those dominate. And, you're probably wondering, why are things like this? Why are things the way they are? And the truth is simple. I'm here to answer that. First of all, the culture that we live in. Some blame the CIA, some, blame other people, but the culture that we live in promotes, being a bop, being a 304, being out in the streets. You can see it in the music, what's popular in the culture. That's what's cool. That's what's trendy. Being a nonchalant dreadhead, being nonchalant, being out in the streets, having a roster, being a FOT, having options, being a baddie, all of that stuff is popular. Love is mocked. It's made fun of. You're called weak for it. You're called being a simp. Girls and guys, they mock it. So we got that, one. And two, the streets are the easier path. The streets don't require any vulnerability. The streets don't require any self-reflection. The streets operate solely off of ego, desire, and, pride and ego. The streets are the easier path. They don't require any real effort. They don't require you, they don't require any real connection. The streets, you could still be prideful. You could still be egotistical. You could still serve self. The easier path, serving self, not facing self. Being a character played by being in the streets, as opposed to being in a loving relationship, or being in a relationship, where you gotta work things out, face yourself, being vulnerable. The streets are the easier path. The streets offer freedom. The streets offer the illusion of meaning. Options were, the options, it's just people, it's all just desire. There's no love. You're really just an object being in the streets. You're just an object to be desired. The guys, they just want to, they want you for their own benefit. You feel me? Everything's transactional. And, the girls, they want you for what you can provide them for. The streets aren't a place to be, but in our generation, sadly, the streets are what's popular. And it's really those two simple reasons. That's why the streets are on the generational run. But the core real reason is, of course, most people are just victims of themselves, victims of the circumstances, and the circumstances are the culture freaking perpetuates, being out in the streets. That's what's seen as popular. And also, the core big reason is that the streets are the easy path. The streets don't require any vulnerability. The streets don't require any opening up. They don't require you to face yourself and to move past self. And that is why the streets are winning in Gen Z. That is why the streets are more popular. And it's just that simple.